Hello, welcome to Sparks 1524. I'm Nathaniel Miller. I was first accused of racism in 1993. I was at Florida State. I was a junior. We were at the cafeteria having lunch with the guys. The conversation turned to how we had grown up. And a number of guys commented about growing up in some very small towns in Florida or the parts of the country where it was just white people. They weren't upset or anything with all the different races and cultures they encountered at FSU, but they talked about going through culture shock. I recounted growing up in the Air Force, growing up overseas where I was the foreigner. That was a good experience. And then growing up on Air Force bases, though, I made a remark that we were just kids. We had black kids, white kids, Chinese kids, Mexican kids, Pacific Islanders. We didn't care. We were just kids. And that's when I was accused of racism. A couple of the guys, well, all of them white, interestingly enough, turned and told me I was being a racist because by looking at people, as individuals, I was not recognizing the reality of cultural oppression their ancestors had faced. I realized, although I wasn't able to articulate it very well back then, one, I was very stunned, and two, it was 30 years ago when I was a college kid, that was a really stupid thing for them to say. And it was also a very dangerous attitude for them to take. 30 years later, we're seeing how we, the people, have allowed that kind of an attitude to play out. You don't fight racism by being a racist. Today, in order to be an anti-racist, as the buzzword goes, you have to look in the mirror and judge yourself and others based on your skin color. As a Caucasian male, I'm supposed to recognize my privilege and that my race are oppressors. That's a racist statement. And I'm supposed to look at minorities and look at them in a hierarchy of oppression. Certain minorities are oppressed really bad, certain are oppressed bad, certain are sort of oppressed. That's racism. You don't fight racism by being racist. Another way to think about how this is played is, and you've got to think independently away from the emotionalism. As soon as somebody, especially a white man, stands up and says, you're behaving in a racist fashion by saying all white people are oppressors, and the other person immediately says, well, that's just a white man not wanting his privilege taken away. That's racism and sexism right there. They're not actually arguing back the point. And when I say argue, I'm not talking about getting your face and fight. I'm talking argue in the liberal debate sense where I make my point, you make your point, we go back and forth and discuss it. They're not arguing or discussing the point. They're using racism to dismiss the person so they don't have to discuss it and they keep power. It's easy to blame politicians for this. It's easy to blame these nutballs on the media and these crazy influencers on social media. But the fact is, we the people are doing this to ourselves. We are a very compassionate country. In spite of the media narratives of systemic racism, we are the first nation to truly start codifying in written law that all men were created equal. And that was, yes, I'm going to say it straight up, I'm a historian. That was horribly and perfectly applied. But if you put it in context to realize that out of almost 10,000 years of written human history, we are the first country that put into law that people do not rule other people simply based on aristocracy or clergy or wealth. That started expanding human freedom, and it was inevitable that eventually we get it through our heads. This has to include women in the discussion. If we're going to expand human freedom, this has to include other races as we grew. That's not systemic racism, that's evolution. But now we're supposed to judge entire swaths of people based on their skin color first in order to not judge people based on their skin color. We the people are doing this to ourselves. It's easy, like I said, to blame the politician, but we have to look in the mirror. Who are we voting for with our dollars by the media we consume? Who are we voting for at the ballot box, and what are they actually saying? There are going to be people who might see this video. I mean, I have a whopping 3 or 4 subscribers, so if I pick up a fifth, maybe I'm going to honk somebody off because they're going to say, oh, it's just another white man. Well, if we want to play this game, it can get played. I'm Roman Catholic. My great-grandfather changed our family name from a French name to Miller, a very Germanic-sounding Protestant name, in order to avoid the no Irish, no Catholics signs that went through the United States for years during the 19th and early 20th century. He eventually ended up in Hawaii where he married a Hispanic woman, and our family actually, through the matriarchal side, became Hispanic. But my great-grandfather had to change our family name to avoid oppression. Well, What if I started a movement that declared all Protestants, Buddhists, all non-Christians as oppressors because of how Roman Catholics, like my ancestors, were oppressed? And I immediately say, if you're any kind of a non-Christian, you're an oppressor. And as a Roman Catholic, I was oppressed. That is a patently absurd statement for me to make. We all can agree on that. But we're told where it comes to race, we're supposed to judge entire populations as victims. And it's also a hierarchy of victimhood. Certain races are really oppressed. Certain races are oppressed. Certain are kind of oppressed. And certain races are just inconvenienced. Usually that last one seems to be how many people view the Jews. And that's one of the pernicious ways anti-Semitism takes root. Oh, well, because they're white, they're not really oppressed. It was just white people against white people. That's incredibly racist. Race is not just skin color. Race is an ethnicity. Race is cultural identity. You want to start breaking down oppressive groups, we will fracture our society into 1,000 pieces, and each of those tribes will be fighting the other, killing the other for wealth and power, which is exactly what our society has been striving to avoid for 200 years by expanding the definition of human freedom. If you watch this or you read the written column, which I have linked below that I also wrote on this subject, and your immediate reaction is that I'm a racist for saying I won't tolerate racist behavior, there's a problem. The only thing evil needs to succeed is good people to say nothing. And a lot of good people say nothing because we are a people with a conscience. Americans are people that have taken seriously as a whole the imperfections of our past. Yeah, we've done great things since 1776. We have. We've also done awful things. Unlike most peoples in human history, we've taken that on board and are striving. Otherwise, the definition of human freedom would not have expanded beyond white land-holding males. But because as a people we took this on board and took it seriously, we've expanded it now where you have racial minorities on television every night talking to millions of people. We have racial minorities in the hallowed halls of Congress representing their districts. And in theory, not just representing the districts, the people of their race, but all the races in their districts. Yet we the people are allowing this to be threatened because we don't want to stand up and be accused of racism. That's understandable. Ostracism hurts. Human beings, we're pack animals. You thrust us out of the herd, the social isolation alone is enough to kill us. But we are allowing our society to rot because we do not want to stand up and say to somebody, you are being racist by saying I have to judge other people based on their race in order to not judge them based on their race. You are being racist by saying I'm an oppressor because of my race. You don't fight racism by being racist. And if we, the people, don't get a handle on this, we are going to allow our society to fracture into warring tribes. I don't know if that means armed conflict or civil conflict where the courts litigate back and forth as people sue each other for wealth and power. Either way, it's a fracture and civil society has collapsed. But we, the people, will be responsible. Racism is racism. And you cannot fight racism by being racist. Another point here that I find obscene is that people who use racism to fight racism are denigrating those who actually are the victims of racism. All of our Asian citizens that have been assaulted, pushed in front of subway trains, shot, beaten up, they are kind of dismissed by the media at large because they're not the right particular race to talk about. That's racism. And now, so you have the Asian community in our country with a growing resentment against other races because their pain, the crimes against them are being being dismissed. The Jewish people get this all the time. How often have big media figures dismissed the Holocaust because it was just white people on white people, or it really wasn't about race, it was about white supremacy against, other white people. That's still racism. Anti-Semitism is racism. You don't fight racism by being racist. And good people have to put their money where their mouth is and say something, even if they just have a small little platform that maybe have 4 or 5 people. I do thank you for your attention. If you think this video is worthwhile, please feel free to like, feel free to share it. If you do, subscribe, Sparks 1524. I usually go into things like travel logs, Navy memories, the writer's craft, things like that. But sometimes you have to stand up and say, racism is wrong, and you don't fight racism by being a racist. And if you think independently about it and watch how people react when you stand up and call out racism, you will see who the real racists are. Because they will not step back and say, let's discuss this point. You might have an idea. They will stand up and say, you're a racist simply for bringing it up because you're afraid of your power being taken away. They didn't argue the point. They just dismissed you based on race, which is racism. Think independently, and until we meet again, go and do some great things.